Hey everybody, welcome to the final session of BSE 308. For those of you who have stumbled into this video possibly, this is a class called Career Management for Engineers. It's BSE, or Biological Systems Engineering. The course number is 308, offered here at UW-Madison. If you want to learn more about this class, I'm happy to talk with you and would love to have you join the class in the future. For those of you who are currently in the class, for full authenticity, today is April 27th, double check that, April 27th of 2022, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's a little bit colder than what I had expected. It's barely above the 30s, and hopefully things warm up a little bit. What I would like for you to do as the session summary for this last and final session of the semester is to simply talk briefly about what you are going to do in the future to continue your growth as a professional, regardless of your major, whether it's BSE or another engineering discipline or one of the other groups of people or disciplines represented in our class. Talk about what you are going to do as a professional in your field to continue your growth as a professional. Again, along the lines of the things that we have talked about in this class. As a quick hint, you may also wish to use this in your final project. That is the career plan, and that is our final big assignment in addition to this session summary assignment. So today what I want to talk about briefly is writing your story, building your future, and what I'm going to call the rule of 72s. I shouldn't say what I'm going to call. The rule of 72s has been around for a long time, but I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin on the idea of the rule of 72 as it relates to compounding growth, compounding interest, and also compounding the investments that you make in yourself as an individual and as a professional. So just a quick reminder, since we are at the end of the semester, make sure that your three big assignment submissions are all in. Again, the resume, the social media makeover, and then your final career plan. I need grades for all three of those. And then remember that the resume, the particular assignment connected to the resume, actually has the three parts. And I'm not going to go through those. If you're confused about that, make sure that you do talk to me. There will also be the session summary. I've already talked about that for this video. Again, talk about what you're going to do to continue your work growing as a professional. I would actually really love to have you complete for extra credit the 2 course evaluations, the APHIS one, which is available now, and I think it'll actually close down on either May 5th or May 6th. That one is on the honor system. If you tell me that you have completed that, I have really no way of knowing, but you'll get 3 extra points for that. By the way, that one is fully anonymous. I don't have access to the results of that survey, and even if I did have it now, it's totally anonymized. But I will not actually be looking at that until the Friday. Typically, it's the Friday or the Saturday after final grades are submitted. I think it's sometime in the teens. It's like May 15th is when I'll be getting that. And then the other one is more of a content evaluation. Tell me what you thought about the speakers. Do I keep particular people? Do I maybe look for other speakers? How can I improve the class? And there's also an opportunity to comment there on the different lectures that I have done. Again, very optional and not quite as anonymous, because I actually, when it comes time to looking at those, I actually can see who said what. So that's why I don't have you do a direct evaluation of my talks, mainly just to protect your confidentiality. Not that my feelings would be hurt. I'm very open to anything that you might want to suggest to improve the class or improve the lectures that I do in this class. Speaking of that, I began the class about 8 weeks ago talking about the future, and I spent a lot of time talking about the future and a lot of these trends that we see, like a growing world population needing to double agricultural production for 3 reasons: population growth, the increasing dependence on energy from agriculture and from bioproducts. And the third reason is simply because people, human beings, as we get wealthier and wealthier as a global population, we demand more protein. And protein by its very nature is less efficient than plant materials. So we got to double food production. I'm not going to go through all these. I talked about the increasing role of technology, in particular digital technology, and the growth of data capture, data flow, the need to deal with tons of data. I also talked about the changing demographics, particularly in engineering and the sciences, and that includes the increasing role of women, not just here in the United States, but globally. and how important that is for our global future to be able to continue the positive trajectories that I also talked about a little bit at the beginning. Now what I want to do is to go back a little bit in history. I've had lots of speakers tell you stories and tell you about their history and things that they've done and where they've come from. I want to share with you just a couple of ideas here, and I want to start with a short story from about 25, not quite 25 years ago. Back at that time, let me just tell you, my two kids were born. I've got sons Michael and Jack. Michael was born in 1993 and Jack was born in 1996. So Jack just turned 26 years old, just to kind of give you some time reference. Back at that time, back in the mid 1990s, I was young. Obviously, I was in my mid 30s at that time. My wife, similar age, my wife's a couple of years younger. I was an assistant and then soon to be an associate professor at the University of Minnesota. For me, things were busy, things were stressful. I was teaching a lot of classes. I was doing research. I was trying to get tenure, which is really important for a young assistant professor. My wife, on the other hand, was an emergency room nurse at the big Minneapolis Children's Hospital. She also did clinical education. Bottom line is we both had really stressful jobs as we began to have kids. So we've got these two little kids. We got little Michael and we got Jack running around, sort of early toddlerhood, early preschool age. And actually in 1996 and 97, Jack was an infant. So one of the things that we decided to do as a couple is we made this sort of pact, and we still do this today. And the pact or the agreement was and is we would give each other up to a week, 1 week per year to basically do whatever we wanted to do, to travel, to go on a little mini vacation. That's actually at about the time later I started going to music festivals in the summertime. But from roughly 1996 until the early part of the 2000s, I would go north. My wife would go south. She had a sister in Florida and a brother-in-law who's actually still in South Carolina. So she would travel south to see family, typically in the winter. I, on the other hand, would go north. And what I would typically do is at the very end of May or the very beginning of June is I would go north, and the main reason is to go fishing. I still love to fish, and my sons love to fish now, but I would go north to a place called the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters is near Ely, Minnesota. Ely, Minnesota is about 4 hours north of the Twin Cities, a beautiful little town. You can see here a population of about 3,500 people. The Boundary Waters, if you've never been there, is a pretty cool place. There is a part of the Boundary Waters, or the Boundary Waters, I should say, is also abbreviated BWCA. BWCA stands for Boundary Waters Canoe Area. It's a wilderness area, and the majority of the lakes that are in the Boundary Waters are accessible only by canoe. And if you go north of the Boundary Waters, you're into Canada, and then there's another canoe wilderness area up there called Quetico. I've also been up to the Quetico with my son, back in the I think it was 2011 or 2012. But anyway, I would go north, and I would go up there at that particular time of the year to go fishing. And what I would do is I would, again, from 1996 to probably 2000 or 2001, I would stay on a big lake called Snowbank Lake. Snowbank Lake is quite large. I think the acreage is like 4,500 acres. It's about half the size of Lake Mendota here in Madison, but Snowbank Lake is quite a bit different in that there are a lot of bays, there are a lot of islands. It's very remote. It's very much wilderness. You can see that in the middle of the lake there is that kind of like a corner of a box where it says BWCA. The unique thing about Snowbank Lake is that it was half in the Boundary Waters. That's the part to the left or to the west, and the part to the right or to the east is wilderness. And lakes in the Boundary Waters that are half in and half out of the Boundary Waters, you can actually go in with a small boat and motor. You don't have to be just limited to a canoe. And that's why I chose Snowbank Lake, is I could go out there with my little boat and my little motor in addition to having a canoe and kind of like make it around and do all the fishing that I wanted to do, and just really had an awesome time. Very remote. It looks like a well-settled lake, but all the way around it is wilderness. When I would go up there, the first couple of years, I would actually camp on an island called Harry's Island right there in the middle of the lake. and I would camp on that little dot that you see at the end of the purple arrow. Harry's Island, if you looked north or if you looked east, because you were looking up into Canada, no civilization, no people for literally hundreds and hundreds of miles. So the most beautiful stars, the most beautiful northern lights I have ever seen were right there camped at the edge of Harry's Island. It got to be a little bit less convenient, especially because I like to fish and I like to cover a lot of water. So the other thing that I would often do, and I think in 97, 98, 99, is I would actually stay at a little resort. I almost hesitate to call it a resort, but it was a little cabin, a little sort of a motel room called Smitty's on Snowbank, a little resort on Snowbank Lake. And what they did is they would rent out boats, so I'd be able to go fishing during the day, and then I could come back and get well rested, get good night's sleep. I didn't have to worry about tying my food up into putting it up into trees so the bears wouldn't get after my food. But here's the other thing about staying at Smitty's on Snowbank in this little cabin. I could fish all day, and I could come home in the evening just in time to get cleaned up again, this is late May, early June, and I'd get cleaned up and I would head back into town in my, I would drive, I would drive myself back into town, back into Ely, which was about a 25 or 26 mile trip. And the reason why this was so important to me back in the 1990s was because I actually adored the Chicago Bulls. The Chicago Bulls, if you don't know of their legacy, they won 6 NBA basketball championships. I think it was 3 in a row, and then Michael Jordan retired for a while, and then they won 3 in a row after that. I loved Michael Jordan. I only got to see him one time play in person, but I went to tons of Chicago Bulls games as a little kid. I'm guessing that's where I got my sort of like affection for them. I loved Michael Jordan, but I also love these other guys. Scottie Pippen, number 33, power forward, awesome player. I think he's probably a Hall of Fame basketball player. And my favorite basketball player of all times is Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman was a powerhouse rebounder. As soon as the Chicago Bulls got a hold of Dennis Rodman, they were unstoppable because of his prowess. He was also a little bit of an odd guy. I actually pulled this from my shelf here. I've got the Dennis Rodman McDonald's cup from 1996. This is actually a collector's item. The cool thing about this cup is when you put cold water, you put ice or soda in it, Dennis Rodman's hair turns purple, or I think it's actually blue. So I was a big time Chicago Bulls fan. So I would head into town. Actually kind of a long trip. Like I said, 26, 27 miles. And quite interesting because you were traveling through the wilderness, lots of trees, lots of just wildlife. And so every time I would make this trip, and each time I would go, I would probably drive into Ely to watch the Bulls like 2 or 3 or 4 times. But each time I would either be coming or going. I would see deer, I would see moose, bears, I saw wolves, and quite an adventure. And it was something that really, really meant a lot to me to be able to do this. What I would do is I would go into downtown Ely and I would go into this sort of sports bar. At the time, it was called Cranberry, the Cranberry. Now it's called, what is it called? Boathouse Restaurant and Brew Pub. And the sports bar had a nice, probably like a 60-inch color TV hung on the wall. So I would go in, and because I'm in Ely, Minnesota, not a lot of Chicago Bulls fans, so I would find a table, kind of camp out, order my food, maybe have a beer or whatever, and I would watch the game, and then like 2.5 or 3 hours later, I'd head back to my camp or back to the Smitty's on Snowbank to enjoy the rest of the night, and then get up the next morning and start this whole process over again. Well, there was one night in particular, I got to my spot, I ordered probably a Reuben sandwich and a beer, and I sit down, and all of a sudden I am joined, actually it got to be a little more crowded. I ended up being joined by 3 men. This was kind of weird. Now that I look back at it, it was like, okay, why did these guys happen to show up at this particular place and time? But they did. They were all older guys. They're a lot older than me. Again, I was in my mid-30s. These guys were probably all in their 70s. They may have actually been sort of early 80s. And they said, hey, do you mind if we join us? It's like, I didn't really have much of a choice. I had a pretty big table I was sitting at, and I didn't want to be greedy, so I invited them to join me. I was actually looking forward to having quiet time, but they were super chatty. And one of the things that I found out about these three old guys is that they had had very successful. They were all three business people, businessmen. They were all retired. This was their 10th year in a row that they had gone away to what they kept referring it to as fishing camp. And it was a little bit suspicious to me because I asked them about fishing. I was really curious, like, okay, what kind of bait are you using? Are you catching fish? Is it slow? Are you catching a lot of fish? How deep is the water you're fishing in? And they basically seemed to know nothing. So it really did it made me question whether they were really there to fish or to just hang out and maybe get away just like I was doing. They asked a ton of questions about me, almost like they were a little bit suspicious. Did I have kids? Was I married? What did my wife think about getting away? Was I running away from something? And when I explained to them that my wife and I had this sort of pact, they thought that that was really cool. And apparently they had sort of the same thing going, that they had been doing the same thing with their families for this last 10-year period. Two of them were from Chicago. That explained why they were in also watching the Bulls game. And the thing that I will always remember about these three guys is that they were super content. They just seemed so happy, and they seemed very eager to share literally three stories. And each one of them, it was like a set, like a scene from a movie. It was like each one of them had their story kind of queued up, and like they were going to tell me their story, whether I wanted to hear it or not. So I was patient and I listened. Like I said, whether I wanted to hear it or not, I didn't have a choice. I didn't want to lose my table spot. But their stories were so profound to me that I did write those down. I actually wrote a blog post a few years after and tried to capture the moment, which helps me to also remember why, the story that I'm telling you here today. So here were their three pieces of advice, their three words of wisdom. Number one is to find a person, a significant other, a life partner, a spouse, however you choose to look at it, but to find a significant friend or person or significant other in your life and find ways to take care of each other. One of the things that my wife and I, very quickly discovered is number one, maintaining the economics of a household, both before we had children and then also after. And now that our kids are gone, that having two people in the household is very helpful economically. The other thing that I have learned since that time and doing a little bit of studying in this area is people who have others in their lives, again, a network of friends, a network of people, a spouse or a significant other, tend to live longer, healthier lives, in part because they feel compelled to take care of themselves, but they also have other people looking out and looking after them. And I don't remember like the marital status of these three guys, but they really did, take seriously the importance of having friends and having other people who are part of their lives to help take care of them. But they also, number two, the second lesson was to also make sure that you really think carefully about taking care of yourself. At this time, this was in 1998 when these three guys sat next to me. And because things were so busy and so crazy, I had really kind of stopped looking after myself. I'd gained weight. I wasn't exercising. I often didn't feel really good about myself. And it really spurred me, especially as my kids got to be a little bit older, to begin to do more physical things with them. And then I became much more active, both officially exercising, but also making sure to get in regular walks, physical activity, bike riding. Now I love to hike. We live right at the edge of the Ice Age Trail. But really thinking about taking care of yourself, not only physically, but also mentally, and I can lean out of this a little bit, and spiritually. So when you say spiritually, that doesn't for me necessarily mean going to church, but finding really good, quiet moments of being able to simply escape the everyday life, to be able to think, to be able to be mindful, actually do a little bit of meditation. So finding ways to sort of nurture not only your body, but also to nurture your spirit. And I think back to this now, back to my experience with these three men back in 1998, and I was doing that, right? Like I was spending all day out on the water in a boat, peaceful, not seeing other people, being alone with my thoughts in a non-judgmental way. And I was really doing this whether I realized it or not. So I think with all of these ideas, you need to find things that work for you in your own unique way. The last thing that they talked about was probably the least probably the most familiar to me, and that was to place your faith in compound interest. I knew about this because I had taken engineering economics classes in college. I took a class similar to BSE 308 on personal finance, so I knew a lot about investing and the value of compound interest. But what I didn't really realize is how quickly things would happen in my life. At that time, we began to save for college for our kids, and we saved very diligently. And guess what? By the time our kids were in school, I was able to use our savings that we had accumulated to get them both all the way through college, to the point now where I actually have a little bit of leftover cash that we've now invested for grandkids, assuming that in the future we have grandkids who want to go to college. We were able to do a lot of the things that we were able to do as a couple now because of the idea of compound interest. If you're not familiar with the idea, let's talk about it briefly. Go and find a calculator and calculate if you save something like $50 a month in your first job for the first 30 years. By the time you get to be my age, by the time you get to be 60 years old, you've got a lot of money saved up, and it will grow in a compounded way. The other thing that's related to that is when you get out into the real world and you get that first big job, many of you are probably not going to have access to what we would consider to be traditional pensions, but you probably will have access to different forms of saving and investing. For example, a 401k investment account. And in many cases, companies will actually match if you save, for example, if you save $50 in the month of April, in many cases, your company will kick in a matching amount. And if you think about that, if they're matching you dollar for dollar, you're immediately getting a 100% return on your investment. The $50 you're putting in is $100 actually. And again, look at it with a calculator and try to figure out how that will grow over time. It really does make a difference. Related to that is an idea. So that's kind of my three big life lessons. Compound interest, finding a significant other person in your life, whether that's a friend, spouse, partner, life partner, and then also making sure to take care of yourself. I want to go a little bit deeper, though, on this idea of compounding investments, or the compound interest that accrues when you make an investment. There is something called the rule of 72s. I did not make it up. This has been around for a long time. You could actually go on several websites and see how they derive. It's actually a pretty simple mathematical concept. But the idea of the rule of 72s, if you take the number 72 and you divide it by the rate of return on an investment, it is that number is equal to the time for that investment to double. So really simple situation. Let's say that you invest in a stock fund. It could be an American company or another global company. And let's say that investment compounds at a rate of 10% per year. The time that it's going to take you to double that investment, let's say you invest $5,000, the time that it takes to grow from $5,000 to $10,000 is 72 divided by 10. 10% being the rate of return, and that's 7.2 years. So in 7.2 years, my initial investment of $5,000 grows to $10,000. 7.2 years later, 10 grows to 20, 20 to 40, etc. So this is a really powerful idea when you look at personal finances. However, again, there's always a however and kind of a next part to this. I would really also like for you to think about how this principle applies to you as a person. In other words, if I can change myself or grow myself or learn new things or explore new areas, and I can change myself just, for example, at a rate of 1% per week, that means that in a year and a half or 72 weeks, right? In 72 weeks, so that would be 1 year plus 20 weeks, I can be almost essentially a completely different person because I have changed 100% of myself according to the laws of compounding investments. Or if I change, I've heard about people who are able to change. I don't know how we actually quantify this, but people who have said, I changed so much during a major trip. I have a friend who I don't know if he still works here at UW-Madison. His first name is Alan. Happy to give you more information about Alan. Alan and his wife took a bike ride, not just any bike ride, not just a bike ride across the state of Wisconsin, but they started up in the northern part of Canada, and they rode their bikes all the way to the far southern tip of South America. If you can imagine something that significant. So he said, when I came back, even after pedaling through all of North America, he said, I was a totally, totally different person. I saw the world different. It was better. I saw the beauty of nature. I saw the beauty of people. I was just a different person. And so you could argue that in his case, when you're doing something that's that intense, maybe you're changing at a rate of 1% per day. So in 72 days, again, you will be a 100% different person. How you do that is up to you. Learning, growing, the whole idea of professional development, like we've tried to really emphasize in this class, travel. I'm a big believer in the importance of travel for not only going on that trip, but the process, the learning, the sort of being put a little bit off balance when you travel to a new location, especially if you travel to a different part of the world. It can actually really help you to grow as a person. Again, the importance of physical and mental exercise, but physical exercise in particular may be pretty difficult to grow at a rate of 1% per day. But by being active, it does stimulate so many of our different systems in our body, and you really do have the potential to grow through exercise. And the last one, I think I mentioned this briefly, is meditation. So I'm not going to go into more detail, but think about these investments that you're making and the investments that we've talked about so much in BSE 308 as being able to compound just like those investments that you put into the bank or into a CD or a stock fund or your 401k. Personal growth, personal investment has that same potential to compound. So let me come back and kind of bring this full circle. I talked at the beginning of the semester with all these positive things happening in our world, and I attributed in these as my own theory, my own sort of way of looking at the world. Number one is the whole idea of using engineering and science, solving problems using science and logic and the ability to organize the world in a coherent way. Number two is about this idea of purposely building human relationships. I've just kind of talked about that with my lessons from these three old guys, sort of like the micro level. For me personally, the relationships with my spouse and my family, but also with your friends. But then looking at it as a bigger world, the importance of growing and building your professional network. And then again, I've talked about the wise use of technology, whether that means social media to build your personal brand, or for those of you who will be working with technology as part of your career, the ability to use data and information and technology to make the world a better place. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. I do hope that you have had an enjoyable semester. I hope that you have learned something from this class and that you'll share it with others. I would also hope that you would put a little plug in for BSE 308. It will be offered in the future. I don't know if I will again offer it as an 8-week class, but it'll definitely be offered again in the future. So I would really love to have you share that with others. As we go through life, make sure that you do stay in touch. I am on LinkedIn and would appreciate being connected to you, learning about what you do. And I also want to just say, for those of you who I will be seeing again in the near future, I hope you have a great summer. Again, stay in touch. Check in with me maybe next fall when classes resume. I look forward to it. Have a great one, and also have an enjoyable summer. And for those of you who I will not see again, have an enjoyable career. Thank you.